My name is TK Heinman. I am the clinical director at Renew Clinic. I was raised in a loving home with two good parents, and for the most part, from the outside looking in, me becoming an addict didn't really make sense. There was always this internal battle, this internal narrative of not being good enough, not fitting in, not being liked, I'll never measure up, and this narrative really started in my teenage years. And when I discovered drugs in high school, all of a sudden I found something that filled that void. It was something that allowed me to fit in, it allowed me to be social. I had found my place, if you will. But when I was 19, I got hurt and had a few surgeries on my right hand, and a doctor throughout those surgeries had prescribed me Percocets. And after being on Percocets for about 4 months and coming off of them, not knowing that the sickness I was experiencing was actually withdrawals, I began to use more. I started to find them on the streets, and that started a really long battle with opioid pain pills. Went to treatment a bunch of times from the age of 17 to 23. And when I turned 23, I went to another treatment center in Florida, and that was for the first time when I managed to put together some sobriety. So when I got out of that treatment center, I went back to school, got my bachelor's degree, went all the way through to getting my master's degree, and for the most part, stayed sober throughout all of that. And ultimately, I think what I was trying to do during that period of time was erase the part of my story where I had been an addict. Erase the part of my story where I had become homeless. Erase the part of my story where I stole from my friends, where I stole from my family. Erase that shame out of my story. And I thought that if I worked hard enough, if I achieved enough accolades and had a good enough job, then that part of my story could disappear. I obtained all of those things during that period of sobriety. But in 2017, those things began to be jeopardized. I experienced a few really difficult events. My marriage had started to crumble, and the job that I had was put in jeopardy. My wife was pregnant, and we lost our daughter about 5 months into the pregnancy, and then my grandfather passed away. So we had these 4 really big events that happened in a short period of time, and I had no way of dealing with it. I had no way of coping with it. So in August of 2017, I relapsed, and I took a hard plunge back into what I knew would make me feel better. And within a period of 7 or 8 months, I started using other drugs I had never touched before, and within that time frame had almost entirely ruined my life. My marriage at that point was over. My career had taken a drastic turn for the worst. I wasn't working, we'd lost our house. Essentially, we had lost everything. I had lost everything. So 7 or 8 months into that, I go back to treatment. That wasn't enough. I stayed sober for a couple months, and I kept going and I kept going all the way into a heroin overdose that left me on life support for 5 days. That's still hard to talk about. I don't remember really anything for that period of 5 days, but what I do remember was coming out of the coma. I was at Park West Hospital. I was coming out of the coma and seeing my mother and some of my friends were there, and just seeing the sheer terror and fear and sadness on their faces. And there was a moment for me it was this realization that I had caused that. After I'd been out of the coma for a day or two, some men from Shoreline Church came to visit me, but they just kept telling me that, they said, "We love you." We said, God has a calling on your life, TK. And I really wanted to believe that. I just didn't know if I could. Before I was discharged from the hospital, I'll never forget it. The internal medicine physician walked into the room, and he just looked at me and he said, "Kid, you're a miracle." He said, we don't quite understand how you made it, because when you arrived at the hospital, you were dead. He proceeded to tell me that when I was found at my house, my heart rate was 5 beats per minute. My internal core temperature was only 86 degrees, and I was breathing at a respiratory rate of 5 breaths per minute. I had died. Shortly after that conversation with that physician, I became a believer. Up until that point, I had always thought that science could explain everything, and it was in this moment, being told by a physician whose life is science, that science can't explain why I'm still here. I was left with a divine understanding that this had been an intervention from God, and I became a believer in the hospital. After that, I went back to treatment again, except this time I went to a Christ-centered treatment center, and my life was permanently changed. And I was introduced to a group of men that loved on me, supported me, taught me scripture, taught me the word. I started to believe that there is a God that loves me. There is a God that created me perfect in His image. And beginning to believe those things really started to just unravel this horrible narrative I had told about myself for so long. I'm loved and I am worthy because Christ says that I am. And coming to belief in that changed my life. My life today is, one, it's not even a reflection of what it used to be, but two, it's far better than I could have ever dreamed. I have 3 beautiful children now. I have a beautiful wife. We've been married for 2 years. I'm sober, and now I get to share this story with other addicts.